Welcome to the Christianity in Business podcast with host Darren Shear, an initiative of the Archie W. Dunham College of Business at Houston Baptist University. This is the show that helps Christian business leaders to integrate biblical values into business. You can get more information about the HBU Center for Christianity in Business and sign up to receive free access to all 5 issues of the Christian Business Review Journal by visiting our website at christianityinbusiness.com.
On today's episode, we're joined by Archie Dunham. Archie is Chairman Emeritus of Chesapeake Energy, which is the second largest natural gas producer in the United States, and he's also the retired chairman of the board of ConocoPhillips. He was instrumental in orchestrating Conoco's IPO separation from DuPont in 1998, and at the time that was the largest IPO in the history of the United States. And he also negotiated the merger of equals between Conoco Incorporated and Phillips in 2001, which created the third largest energy company in America and fifth largest in the world. And in 98, he was recognized by the World Affairs Council as Houston's International Citizen of the Year and inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. And he says the most meaningful award he has ever received was being named Houston's Father of the Year in 1998. And in addition to giving extravagantly to many other worthy causes and organizations, he and his wife have also been tremendously generous to Houston Baptist University, which has resulted in various landmarks within the campus named in their honor to attest to their strong Christian faith and values, including the Archie W. Dunham College of Business, Dunham Field, the Linda and Archie Dunham Theater, and the Dunham Bible Museum. And it's safe to say that the Christianity and Business podcast may not exist if it wasn't for him and his wife and their generosity and commitment to the Lord. So welcome to the Christianity and Business podcast, Archie.
Thank you, Darren. I look forward to the podcast. I've not done one of these before.
Good. Well, it's going to be fun. And I want to start off with a fun question here. And I'm curious, what was it like to meet with the chief of a reindeer herding tribe 1,400 miles north of Moscow to establish some friendship and goodwill before drilling for oil on his land? What was that experience like?
Well, it was a really interesting and unusual experience. You know, we didn't have, I guess, a legal obligation to go and ask the chief for the right to drill on his property. We already had that right from the central government in Moscow. But I thought it important, you know, for the people that lived on the land to know who Conoco was and the leadership of Conoco. We were drilling oil wells. We were laying pipelines across their country, and it was important for me to make that relationship. And interestingly enough, actually, we had an ABC film crew with us that filmed all of the interactions, both in Moscow and up in the area where the chief was. But the reindeer chief is the only one allowed to have his wife with him. And so they were living in a tent. All they had was a wood fire, just like an Indian teepee tent, and they had other reindeer helpers with him. They were there without their spouses, and then they had thousands of caribou. And so we went there to show friendship. I had gifts. I had matches that would not blow out in strong winds, so they could light their fires and not, have to keep trying to keep the fire going. Ropes, all kinds of things that they had asked us to bring in the form of gifts to show our appreciation to them. And we flew by helicopter. We were way north of the Arctic Circle, probably a minus 40 degrees at that time. Found the herd by just, flying over the territory and looking for a large herd of caribou. Found the herd, landed, went into his tent, and it was just myself and my executive assistant, a government official from Moscow that was with us. I think I had my country manager, our Russian country manager, as well, and the TV crew. And so we sat down. I gave him the gifts. We had a translator, and it was a dirt floor. And so he kind of, after receiving the gifts, reached over behind him and pulled out a huge chunk of reindeer meat, and it was frozen solid. He had an old rusty knife, and on the fire was a pot. And I didn't know what it was at the time. I found out in a few minutes. But anyway, he took the old knife, he cut off a chunk of reindeer meat, he stuck the knife in the meat, and then he put that in the pot, and it was a pot of reindeer blood. And then he handed the knife to me with the meat on the end of it, and of course the TV cameras are rolling, so I knew that I had to eat the reindeer meat. His wife poured some tea for me, which was a great blessing because I could wash it down. And but I took the meat, I had to, and I ate it, and then quickly got the tea and washed it down. My executive assistant, she shoved her meat into her boot, and then the TV reporter raced outside the tent and lost her breakfast. So it was really a fun experience. But actually, when I got back to Moscow, I started reflecting on what I had done, and I thought, this was in the early '90s when AIDS was a real serious, global kind of a problem, and I thought, now can I catch AIDS, by actually eating reindeer blood? And for a while I was kind of concerned, so I called my company doctor back in Houston. I asked the question. Of course, he said, "No, don't worry about it. You should be okay." So anyway, it was a great experience.
Oh man, I'm glad that any kind of infirmity that you could have gotten from that didn't enter the story, because that could have made things a little more interesting. So
I had no side effects of it whatsoever.
Wow, what an experience. And you never know where God's going to take you in the business world. Archie, I'm curious. So there's incredible commitments that you've made to the Lord in so many ways, but one of the most noticeable, at least to me, as being a part of the HBU community, is your commitment to the College of Business, and that your name bears. And so I'm curious, first of all, why do you believe God cares about business?
Well, I think God cares about His creation, and I mean that's you and me. And if you remember from Genesis, God instructed Adam and Eve to take care of the garden, and to me that's early commerce, and I think in a world that we live in, where we have capitalism and we have democracy, which is a unique combination, I think, for countries around the world, a true democracy, a true practice of capitalism, I think that pleases Him, because it's a form of government, a form of commerce, I think, that allows every one of God's children, if they work hard and if they persevere, if they're men and women of integrity, that they can, in fact, achieve their dream and the potential that God has for them. And so I think God cares about His people, and business is one of the ways that generates income and a good living for His people, and I think He's happy with that.
And in particular, you're also passionate about education and HBU. So I'm curious, why? What is it about Houston Baptist University that has just so captured your and Linda's heart that you would be so generous toward the school?
Well, we became familiar with HBU when our son Kerry graduated from there, so we became acquainted at that time with Dr. Hodo, who was the president before Dr. Sloan. I realized what really an outstanding university president that he was, and I've seen a lot of university presidents. I mean, we've lived all over the United States, East Coast, West Coast. I've interacted in my role as a CEO with many university presidents, and there's some really outstanding university presidents and some that I would call average university presidents. I think Doug Hodo was an outstanding president, and then when Doug retired and the board selected Robert Sloan to be the new president, to me that was an absolute home run for Houston and for HBU. And between Doug and Robert, I think their vision of creating what I would call a world-class Christian university is coming to fruition. And I think the vision that Robert has, the 10 pillars, but most importantly, his just absolutely outstanding leadership. I mean, every institution, whether it's a hospital or a university or a corporation or a nonprofit, they all need leadership. And I've been around a lot of institutions that do not have outstanding leadership, and there's a tremendous difference. And you can see that even in corporate America, and I'm not going to mention any companies, but there have been a lot of companies over the last several years that have really fallen in their reputation and their market value, and it's all due to a lack of leadership. One CEO retires, someone else comes in, the board made a mistake. So leadership is critically important, and I think Robert is one of the most outstanding university presidents in the United States. And so I don't mind supporting some institution that has that kind of leadership.
One of the main books that has informed and really filled you with passion for honoring the Lord in business is the book of Proverbs from the Bible. And I read somewhere that you have read the book of Proverbs every day during your career. Can you give us an example of how you've applied one of the Proverbs from the Bible in one of your leadership roles?
Well, I could give you a lot of examples. I think one of the most important is, I guess it would be Proverbs 22:1. I'll paraphrase. I'm not real good at paraphrasing, but it says something like, "A good name is to be chosen over great riches," and to me, that's it basically focuses on integrity. And that if whatever you're leading, you need to be a man or a woman of integrity, and you need to be focusing on maintaining really the integrity around your name instead of seeking something else. Other verses and chapters in Proverbs, my favorite one probably, it's not in Proverbs, it's in the book of James 1:19, which is quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. But if you read the book of Proverbs, you'll see pieces of that James 1:19 verse, I think, sprinkled throughout Proverbs. And I used to put the first letters of each of those words, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, at the top of my notepad at every one of my management meetings, at every one of my board meetings, whether it was Conoco or ConocoPhillips or Chesapeake or all the other boards that I served on, to try to remind me, that I don't jump in real quick. Don't show your ignorance by speaking too quick. Listen and think, and then don't get angry. That's the worst thing a leader can do, I think, is to get angry in public. And so it's just good advice. I think I've tried to share that with my children and my grandchildren, and later with my great-grandchildren. And so, I can't say that I've read a chapter in Proverbs every day of my life, but I would say maybe 90% of the days. And I just think every leader, I try to read a chapter in Proverbs, and I try to read a chapter in James. And of course, there's only 5 chapters in James, so you read the whole book maybe every week. But James is a practical book, and so is Proverbs. Maybe that's why I like both of them. But I think there are good lessons in leadership in both books, and I can't encourage enough, especially young leaders, to have a practice of reading, both of those books, as well as all your other management and leadership books. But I think God's Word is full of wisdom for leaders.
And I love that practical takeaway about how you would put that verse from James about being quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger at the top of your notepad, so that as the meeting goes on, that you're always keeping that in mind. And I think somebody could take that and probably apply that at work today. Maybe they're on their way to work, maybe consider writing that out before you go into your meeting, just so you can stay mindful of that. Archie, in addition to reading the Proverbs daily and the putting this verse from James there on your notepad, can you give us maybe an example specifically earlier in your career? What were some of the key parts of your daily routine that helped you to become so successful?
Well, I mean, I've always had a practice, a daily prayer time and daily Bible reading time first thing in your day. I think like many people, when you work hard all day, you're tired at the end of the day. And if you decide that you're going to do your prayer time and your Bible study time at the end of the day, I think in many cases you're too tired to do that and you don't do it. And so my discipline throughout my career has been to do, my prayer and my Bible study at the beginning of the day. It means you get up early, and that's good too because everything's quiet. And you can have that private time with just you and God. And I just think that's a critically important. First of all, you're sharing, you're seeking guidance and asking for help. It's just a special, quiet time to get your day kind of started in the right direction. And there are all kinds of verses in the Bible that can give you confidence. Philippians 4, 6, and 7. If you've got a hard board meeting coming up, be not anxious, but let your requests be known to God. I mean, there's so many verses that I think can calm your heart and give you guidance and direction, if you look at it at the beginning of the day.
Wow, so good. And one of the things for our listeners is that the question was, what's some of the key parts of your daily routine that's helped you to become so successful? So, not only are you going to have, is it going to be affecting your spiritual life, but your professional life as well. And there's just so much that carries over from having your heart centered, starting from the beginning of the day, that you've been able to bring into your all of the tough decisions that you've had to make and all of the adversity that you've been through. Another question I had was, what's something, and this may be related, what's something about being the CEO of a massive publicly traded company that you think would probably surprise most people?
Well, most CEOs, they're just people. They've in many cases have been blessed with perhaps certain attributes that others have not been blessed with, which allows them maybe to advance higher in their careers. But the one thing probably that the average person is not aware of is that there are many Christian CEOs in the United States and globally, and that seems to be a surprise to a lot of people. But I was one of the early members in a group called the CEO Forum, which was headquartered in Colorado Springs, and it was a group of 400 Christian CEOs in North America, and then we had another 400 globally. And we would try to meet a couple of times a year in seminars but also on the phone and sharing issues with each other. And so that, if you're a CEO in Houston and you've got a certain problem that maybe you just don't want to talk to your immediate subordinates about or your board, you'd rather talk to some other CEO to see how they handle that particular issue. You could pick up the phone and call that person. Maybe he was in Denver or maybe he was in New York City, and listen to how he or she solved a particular issue, especially a lot of the sensitive, socially correct issues, always surrounding corporate America. How did you handle it, and get advice? And probably most people don't realize that, that most CEOs, I think, are totally honest. And I think a lot of the general public probably doesn't believe that because of the decisions and the faults and the, things that a few people do that, that's in the press because of who they are, and the disappointments in their personal life that's in the front page of a newspaper, which is very disappointing. But the vast majority of CEOs are very hardworking, honest people.
I love that. And there's so many great organizations. Well, I wouldn't say so many, but there are several that are doing such a great job. CEO Forum, C12 is one. And I think it's easy at whatever level of your company you're at to kind of get this complex where you feel like you're the only one that's trying to serve God. And Paul, I remember when I was in the military, I was kind of feeling like there was a lack of other Christians. I was brand new to the military, second lieutenant, and then the Lord showed me when Paul came into Corinth, he had that same complex, and the Lord said, "Don't be afraid, for I have many in this place, many in this city." And the Lord said that to me about the military, and it was funny. I started to meet a lot of other Christian officers that I was able to start to find encouragement from and just do life with. And I think that's a great insight that a lot of people just don't realize, that there's so many Christian CEOs out there. I love that.
Absolutely. And also in the military, one of probably my best board member I had on Conoco and ConocoPhillips was General Chuck Krulak, 4-star general,
Sure.
Commandant of the Marine Corps. I mean, the Marine Corps, and I was in the Marine Corps. Of course, that's why I wanted him on our board. But, the Marine Corps has a reputation. What kind of reputation we have? A hard driving, high, drinking, whatever, hell-raising group of people. But Chuck is one of the strongest Christians, I've ever met. And a lot of people wouldn't have known that, So there are strong Christians, I think, in whatever profession that you're in. You just have to seek them out.
I love that. Archie, what was what would you say was the worst moment of your leadership career?
I don't think I had any worst moments. I had some disappointments. Most of the disappointments, when I look back on them, it's not a real big deal. But there was an acquisition that I tried to make before we did the merger with Phillips, trying to buy some assets outside of the United States. I thought they would be a good fit with Conoco, and my bid wasn't high enough, and so I lost that acquisition opportunity. Earlier in my career, I was trying to combine with a pipeline 2 refineries in the western United States, and I thought if I could put the two together, that the changes in the process that would allow would make the Conoco refinery more profitable, which means we could keep it in operation, and not have to sell it or do something else with it. And I was not able to get that accomplished because the other company ended up selling themselves to someone else before we could consummate the deal. So, those weren't worst moments, and they had absolutely, looking back on it, no negative impact on probably me or the company. But at the time, they were little disappointments.
I think that's really a mindset that you have, that because I'm sure if you were to put somebody else that's, like just kind of a negative outlook on life, that they could probably put themselves in what you've been through and say, oh yeah, that was the worst, or this was the worst. But the fact that it's like, yeah, there are disappointments, but you never know what good God is going to bring from those disappointments. And just, having heard stories about how, in fact, if you could share also that story of, there was a time where you were about to take a job, and then you declined the offer, and then God turned around and showed you why he had you stay in the previous position you were in.
Yes, that was, Linda and I were living in California. I was an executive vice president of kind of a baby oil company, a $2 billion Conoco subsidiary. This was in the late 1970s. and it was a great job. I mean, we lived in San Clemente, California. We looked out at the ocean. The kids were in school there and happy, and I had a fantastic job in Newport Beach, and I'd been in the job about probably 2 years, and my secretary comes in the office one morning and says, Archie, the president of Conoco is on the phone and wants to talk to you. And, you know, I had a good mid-level job at that point, but, you know, I was not accustomed to talking to the president of the company, you know, on a daily basis or a monthly basis. And so I was a little surprised. But anyway, I picked up the phone, and he was, you know, he said, Archie, we have this great opportunity that we want you to consider doing. He said, we bought this acreage out on Interstate 10 in Houston, and Conoco wants to build the first college campus corporate headquarters, and we want you to come and be the project manager, and it'll be a big promotion, a big salary increase, and we think you're the guy to do the job, and so why don't you and Linda think about this and, you know, give me a call in a week. So at that time, Linda and I were teaching young adults, and there were a lot of young lieutenants from the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton, which was just south of San Clemente, and other young professionals from Orange County and our Bible class at church. And we were studying the book of Galatians at the time, and so I started praying about, you know, is this something that you want me to do, God, or you want me to stay in California? And I prayed, I think it's a week or 10 days, and the more I read, there was a book chapter in Galatians that basically, to me, to my heart, because I was studying and seeking God's direction, it essentially said, you should stay here. And so, you know, we talked about it, and so I said, okay, you know, Linda, we're just going to stay here. So I called the president back, and he was very, very gracious and said, no problem, you know, you'll have other opportunities. And so I hung up the phone, and it wasn't 15 minutes, and an executive vice president, a vice president in Houston both called and said, you've lost your mind. You don't tell the president of the company you're not going to take a promotion. And we've talked to Mike, and he agreed that he will give you another opportunity to think about this, and you call him back in a week and you tell him you're going to take this job. So, you know, that's a lot of pressure because these were mentors of mine in Houston that really had guided my career. But I started praying about it, and I even became more convinced that I should stay in California. And so I called him back and declined the job. He was very gracious, and then probably less than 2 months, I was promoted to the presidency of this West Coast subsidiary, and that was probably the second best job of my career, other than being chairman, president, and CEO of Conoco. And then 25 years later, Linda and I were invited by General Krulak, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, to come to Washington, D.C., spend the weekend in their home at 8th and I Street. Every Friday night they have a parade where they honor whoever the visiting head of state is that's visiting the president. They have a nice, beautiful parade there at the Commandant's lawn with the Marine Corps band and the drill team and, you know, thousands of guests and tourists that are there witnessing the parade. And after the parade, this young major walked up to me and he said, my commanding officer would like to speak with you. Would you mind going to his quarters? I said, sure, I'll be glad to. And so I went back with the major to where his commanding officer was, and this bird colonel walks out, and he reaches into the pocket of his uniform, and he pulls out a little Bible, and in the Bible was a poorly typed piece of paper that my wife had typed 25 years previous with the names of all of our class members. And he said, you don't remember this, Mr. Dunham. He said, but I came to your home, my wife and I, one night, and you counseled us, you and your wife, about seeking God's will, and should we stay in the Marine Corps, should we get out? He said, I just want you to know, that we decided to stay in the Marine Corps, and today I'm the commanding officer of the Marine Detachment that's responsible for protecting the President of the United States in the White House.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, that's why God said stay in California, and I 25 years later, and that's how God works.
Yeah.
You don't know. He knows what's happening. We don't know what's happening. He knows what prayer to answer in a certain way. We don't. He knows our steps well before we take them.
Yeah. And to be able to look back on guidance from the Lord and know that even if it was just for the sake of one person, it was worth it. And I think that's the way that God works. And in the process, He's blessed you just so tremendously from that decision to honor Him, even when well-meaning, wise people are saying to do something else. Ultimately you have to go to the Lord for yourself, and that's exactly what you did. So we talked. I asked you about your worst moment, and you say you didn't have any worst moments, but you had a few disappointments. As you look back over your professional career, what moment are you most proud of, would you say?
Well, I think you mentioned it, I think, in the introduction, but it would be the largest initial public offering in U.S. history back in 1998 when we separated Conoco from DuPont. Conoco was established in 1875, but then we were acquired by DuPont in 1982, over 100 years later, and then we were part of DuPont then until 1998. And then we separated again. And I was able to I was on the DuPont board, of course, being president of Conoco and CEO of Conoco. And I was able to persuade the board that the shareholders of DuPont it would be to their great advantage if they had shares of an oil company separate from the shares of a chemical company, and then they would get a high price-earnings ratio in both sectors instead of a mediocre price-earnings ratio of a hybrid kind of a company. And so I was able to show that argument to the board, and they approved the separation. And it turned out to be exactly correct that the shareholders, it was really advantageous financially for the shareholders to be able to have energy shares as well as chemical shares, and it was the largest IPO in U.S. history. So that has to be the high mark, I think, of my corporate career.
Sure. And if I remember correctly, that the morning that you were to go ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, you were speaking at a prayer breakfast in Delaware. Is that right?
That's right, Lynn. I mean, I had committed to do the prayer breakfast months and months in advance, and it just happened to turn out to be the day that our stock was going to be posted on the New York Stock Exchange again. And so I had to make the decision: I'm going to honor my commitment to do the prayer breakfast for the state of Delaware, or am I going to cancel out and go to the New York Stock Exchange? Well, as it turns out, I was able to do both. So the company had a helicopter sitting there at the airport in Wilmington, and so I made the presentation to the prayer breakfast, and Linda and I jumped in a car and raced to the helicopter, and they flew us from Wilmington, Delaware to the pier there in New York City near Wall Street, and rushed us there in time to ring the bell that morning in the New York Stock Exchange, which was really a uplifting experience.
Wow, what a day, and what a career, what a wonderful life committed to the Lord. Archie, what would be a parting piece of advice you'd like to leave with our Christian business professionals today?
I guess really three things. One would be integrity. I really so strongly believe that regardless of what level you in corporate America or in private business or in a nonprofit, whatever you're doing in life, you need to be a man or a woman of integrity, absolute integrity. And you have to make that decision, I think, early in your adult life. You're either going to be a man or person of integrity or not, and there's no halfway point. So that's very important. And I think if you just look at what's happened in the media, in Hollywood, in government, all these men, that have been shamed by their conduct because of a lack of integrity, you can see the consequences of a life not storied in integrity. And the second thing would be perseverance. My parents, I think, instilled in me a strong work ethic. I believe that that's absolutely critically important for all young professionals. I mean, you got to work hard, you got to work long. I used to tell myself I've got to outwork my peers because I'm not necessarily smarter than they are. We're all equally pretty intelligent, and so the only way I can differentiate is to work harder and persevere and stay with it, and don't be discouraged, don't be disappointed, keep going forward. And then the last thing is wisdom, and that's why, as we've talked about reading God's Word, it's full of wisdom. And why wouldn't you want to take advantage of that? And so, integrity, perseverance, wisdom, I think are critical attributes for everyone, whether they aspire to be a CEO or they're happy at some mid-level position or whatever in life they're doing. Those three attributes are important, I think, for holding the family together and having, a happy marriage and a successful career.
Powerful advice. Archie, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experiences, your expertise, and your heart and passion with us today. And certainly thank you for your commitment to HBU and to God's kingdom, just for the example that you've been setting. And may God continue to bless everything you put your mind and your heart into.
Thank you, Darren. My pleasure.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if so, we would greatly appreciate it if you would leave us a quick rating and review for the Christianity in Business podcast on iTunes. You can get more information about HBU Center for Christianity in Business at christianityinbusiness.com. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep integrating biblical values into your business.